Hi, this is a continuation, part 2 of the Anglicans Reading Through the Bible series. This section deals with understanding what we read in the Bible. We'll start out with Proverbs 2, 1-5. My children, if you accept my words and treasure up my commandments within you, make your ear attentive to wisdom and inclining your hearts to understanding. If you cry out for insight and raise your voice for understanding, if you seek it like silver and search for it as hidden treasures, then you will understand the fear of the Lord and find the knowledge of God. What about confusing or hard passages? It's happened to us all at one time or another. We read something in the Bible and can't figure out what the heck it means. Here are a few tricks. Try looking in another translation, either another book or by looking on the internet. Try breaking it down into smaller chunks. See what comes before or after a passage. Some Bibles have devotions or commentaries to help with the hard parts. But be sure to read the Bible itself, not just what others say about it. Perhaps most of all, ask our parish priest or someone we trust in the parish. They might be stunned we asked, but they probably know or can find out a good answer. Another concern is if it seems irrelevant or boring. Not every part of the Bible, which is actually a library of 66 books and letters and poems and stuff, is equally riveting. Some parts may speak into our lives more deeply, depending on what we're going through. Especially if we're getting started. It's all right to skip bits sometimes. But we shouldn't be too quick to skip. If we do, then we can want to make the gospel into affirming what we like or what seems best to us, rather than allowing ourselves to be amused, intrigued, challenged, and changed by what we read. Some parts seem contrary to God's will. Agreed. The Bible isn't about God dealing with perfect, obedient people. The Bible reveals Jesus Christ. But we also read about people who do really stupid things. People who are cruel or mean. People who have a deep faith. People who don't seem to have a sweet clue what faith is. God works in history and with individuals and in particular cultures. Sometimes God goes along with stuff we find objectionable today, like killing our enemies. It helps a lot to keep the big picture in mind. For example, we can read a story about a cruel man raping a princess. But we can also read a tender love poem about human dignity, about self-sacrificial love in a couple's marriage. We can read passages about war, but we can also read how God longs for peace and the triumph which is won through Jesus Christ. We need to be prepared to be challenged ourselves. It's easy to judge the world or the Bible by our current standards. Does that mean that our current standard is perfect? Or that others couldn't have had insight, which we might have lost? We need to be prepared to be challenged, including our own common tendencies to quick judgment. How to apply what we read. In applying lessons from the Bible in today's world, people sometimes fall into one of two camps. One danger is to be too reckless and overconfident. The opposite danger is to become too cautious. The cautious camp might say to themselves, maybe I'll get it wrong, or we live in such a different world today. The message of the Bible applies to Bible times, but can it really apply to ours? And in contrast, there are sometimes Christians who say, I know exactly what God means in this verse. And for today, and if you disagree, you must be an atheist. If anything, Anglicans tend toward the cautious camp. Now, certainly we need to be humble if we're seeking God's direction, particularly if we're basing a decision based on one Bible verse. We risk making a very foolish mistake. But all is not lost. First, God has given the Holy Spirit to Christians, who can help us discern what is right. He has also given us minds to think, and given us the gift of one another, the church, to help us to discern His will. If we come up with an interpretation which is contrary to all the other Christians throughout the ages, who's more likely to be wrong? Obviously, if an apparent contradiction is contrary to, say, one of the Ten Commandments, or if it's not loving, or if we have no peace with it, then we need to start again. We also need sometimes to discern the principle which is sometimes behind the text. For example, near the end of the letter to the Colossians, Paul writes about complementary relationships in family life, among parents and children. Then Paul goes on to write about relationships between slaves and their masters. It can be easy to dismiss this instruction, because thankfully, we don't have slavery like this today in the Western world. But what about slavery in the New Testament world? It was a way some people got out of being in debt, or was an employment relationship. A crude and unfair employment relationship, no doubt, but an employment relationship nonetheless. The slave provided the labor, the master provided the housing and small income for the slave. Would it not be appropriate for some employers today to consider how they treat their employees as an expression of their Christian faith? And equally, shouldn't employees consider how they behave at work, regardless of whether their employer is a Christian or not? This ends the second section of the Anglicans Reading from the Bible series.